aside from the fact that we're going to save the state about $1 billion in tax savings just from the work that's being done, there's a bigger picture here, right? Which is the separation of church and state, one of the most misdefined, most damaging things that's ever happened to the church. Because I think most people miss, and I don't know if you even thought about this, when we wake up, if you're in government, if you're in good government, and you're in the church, you wake up caring for the same people. Like, I don't know how many times people think about that. Like, again, I think government's over there. Yeah, but we're caring for the same people that the church wants to care for, and actually, we have better information on them than the church does.
Erik, thank you so much for coming today. It's great to sit down with you and talk. I know personally I've got a ton of questions. I know Brad and I have talked about a lot. So we're just excited to hear what you're doing.
Can't wait.
And learn how we and the people that we serve and know can get involved and help make a difference. In Lifework, I was just praying about it this morning. Our third core value at Lifework, we have 3, but our third is captivating your heart for the city. And I think that's where we want our life workers to be, is how can we help? What can we do? How can we make a difference? And I think your office and the initiatives that you guys are doing would be amazing for our life workers to be like, this is what I want to do. This is how I want to jump in. So if you could even just start there and tell us, what it is, how you're doing it, and then get to that call of action.
What an easy start question.
Yeah.
Just what it is, how you're doing it,
And there
if you
you
can
go.
explain
It's all
everything. Well, let's address first that I thought it was a casual vibe in here, so I'm in my this is like my emergency management, show up at a press conference.
Hey,
Yeah, he always overdresses.
you cannot see me from the waist down.
Yeah, okay. all right,
There's
yeah.
a reason we
He's
have
in
a table in
He's
here.
in athletic shorts, confessing this. So I came in, I felt good for about 5 seconds until I saw Brad. What popped in my mind immediately when you said that was, more than anything, is people have to be willing to know what's happening. Right? Like I've said, there's this kind of, and it's been this story of my life, so I have no stones to throw about this, but I think that if we choose to, we can live our life like this, and we can only see what we need to see, or only know what we want to know. And quite frankly, the way our communities are set up, you can only exist in your community and shop at your store and hang out with your people, and you can go to your church. And I think for me, there's an anthem of my life, which is probably a great way to start this. I believe strongly that there are moments in life where we see something we cannot unsee, and that thing changes the trajectory of our life. Wow. And so, not to go deep quickly, but the truth is that I think there's just a lot of people who don't really want to see, and maybe they're nervous, which would be fair, because
they'd have to do something.
Everyone's sitting at this table before I saw something that was like, oh man, I'm not sure I wanted to see that, but now forevermore, I have to know that. And so when you talk about knowing, I think so much of it, I mean, you think of our city, so I was looking at the skyline as we were starting, it's beautiful, yet so much is going on in that picture. Right? I mean, that landscape of just those buildings and the homes that surround it, I worked in that stadium for almost 12 years, and so, the stadium's beautiful. Right. It's awesome. We also had some crazy things happen. Multiple times had crimes happen right in our Gatorville offices. We had windows shot out. So there's a side part of Jacksonville that I always think, and this is for all communities, but I think, again, you can know what you want to know, or you can have your eyes open to the rest of it. And so I think that's where I'd start, is that I feel like maybe my role, traditionally, and we'll get into this as time goes on, but I think God was showing me things that I could not unsee. And then I think my role has been a lot to show pastors things they can't unsee, to then have them show their flocks things they can't unsee. And this is as we sit here today, right? We're hoping that one thing resonates. I say hear, see, experience, but we're hoping one person hears or sees something today that they're like, oh man. And then, you know why that's great? Is because then we're out of it. The Holy Spirit's in it. And so I look forward to the thought that I can show things to people. It hits them however it's going to hit them. And then, honestly, if God has a plan for them to be involved, He's relentless. And so I think so much of it to me is just simply about being willing to know other worlds exist out there within where you live.
I think similarly, the Chamber of Commerce, the Christian Chamber of Commerce, kind of was established with the idea. I've lived in Jacksonville for 27 years, and there's almost not a week goes by where I don't hear about something that someone is doing in our city or even in our state. And I'll go, hey, Eric, did you know anything about what Tammie's doing?
Right.
And you're like, no, I had no idea. Okay, I want to connect you guys. So the idea of the chamber was to make people aware of what's going on in our city. And I think we kind of live in these silos, not intentionally. I just think we whether it's your church or your ministry or your nonprofit, let's tear those walls down.
Absolutely.
Let's lock arms. Let's co-labor together to advance the gospel.
Push back a little bit in the sense that sometimes I think it is intentional. I think it's selfish driven. And as you were talking and you say, we have blinders and sometimes I think it's because we are so self-absorbed in our life and our family and our kids and our church and all the good.
Right.
Right? And I think some people just don't want to know what's going on because then that's going to take time out of their life and it's going to make them uncomfortable or they'll have to sacrifice. And so I really think the enemy has stepped in and made us so incredibly selfish that we don't see the needs of others and take action.
Yeah. I agree. You're actually both, in my opinion, both right, because that's 100% true. I'll share a story I'd never share, but I'll tell it. And you're forcing forced collision with that moment. Right. That's like, okay, no longer do you get to be there. So the way this all started for me, I'd never tell this part of the story. I'm going to the Gator Bowl. So my drive every year for that almost 12 years was St. Johns County up 95 off Emerson, which everyone will know. Right. Which, by the way, multiple times I'd turn on Cops and there was Emerson. That's a true story, by the way. That McDonald's right there was the film center of Cops several times. But I'd get off on Emerson, I'd make a right, and I'll stop right there at that first traffic light, and I was behind a garbage truck. And I'm probably late 20s. And I'm looking at the garbage truck, and the light was long enough that I could think to myself, that's a lot of garbage. And then I just, for a second, I was like, I wonder how many neighborhoods that guy picked up, or did he only get part of a neighborhood? It's like, he probably got part of a neighborhood's garbage. It's like, well, that's a lot of garbage. Man, where does all that garbage go? And I was like, that's a crazy thought. And in that moment, this is a true story. The light turns green, and I think to myself, I have one of two options. One, never think about it again and go on exactly how my life is. Or two, I have to then have some burden of responsibility to what I throw out and in that moment in my 20s, I was like, I won't think about that again. And so I just kept on going and went to the stadium. It's funny that came back up in my head years later of these moments when I think, and I was very selfish because I was like, if I know that, now I'm on the hook. It's almost like I was that guy that if you get certified in CPR, they read to you. Look, if you're certified in CPR and you don't do something, you're going to get sued.
Responsible, right?
I was like, I don't know if I want to know CPR.
Right, exactly. I might be held responsible here.
They have gotten rid of mouth-to-mouth, so I think more people are willing now to do that. But I think that's true. The other thing I'd say about chambers, Brad, I've thought about this a bunch lately. There's another piece that's interesting when you look at the collective chamber concept, both in business but certainly in the Christian element, is it also unifies a voice, right? Because what we realize is, again, we're a state that has 20,000 faith institutions, 110,000 nonprofits. Well, they all have a voice. No one can take or give that, but they're very quiet if not together, right? One nonprofit, one church having a feeling. And so the whole idea of a chamber to me is to bring together, not that they're all going to agree, by the way.
Right.
I would say at their core, there's probably a few things they agree on. And to amplify a message and say there's more than one person that feels this way. And so you can start to have, I see we're in session right now. And so I see it, right? If you walk into one representative's or one senator's office with one voice, okay. You walk in there representing the collective, it's a totally different conversation.
Totally agree.
And so I think what's beautiful is that both simultaneously I agree that it is selfish, but I also believe you're forcing it by a louder voice being shoved in to say, do you know this is going on? Because if you don't, you need to know. You don't get to just actively do nothing. So,
well, I think what's interesting, I was telling Tammie, we went down, if you recall, to the Hope, Florida
symposium.
Event.
Well, we renamed it.
It was in Orlando.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it was a symposium.
First Lady DeSantis spoke, and I was obviously impressed with her, but I was more impressed with, there was a guy who got up and spoke at that event I think it's a nonprofit. I believe they make bunk beds.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, I was telling Tammie this earlier. And it was like this light went on. Okay, so when I hear of a need, so when we think of our city and we know there's a need, okay, you can't unsee what you've seen. I totally agree with you. But I think what happens, and intentional, unintentional, you're in your silo and you think, okay, there's a need. I don't have the bandwidth to do this. But not only don't I have the bandwidth, I don't know other people who might be able to
Step in.
stick that round peg in that round hole. And so I think, that's what I kind of learned at that.
You're gonna fire
Florida.
up something. The passion I have towards what you're talking. So let's break that down just a second, right? Is at the end of the day, number one, we're talking, and that person was talking fundamentally about foster care children, or children that were susceptible to go into foster care. So two moments that changed my life, and they were both can't unsee what you've seen moments. First was hearing that of the children being removed from homes in our state, 80% were being removed for neglect, 20% for abuse. Now, everybody, it doesn't matter where you exist on the spectrum. You're like, okay, 20%, government's going to remove them to keep them safe. That's
right.
And that's why there'll always be foster care. Can't get rid of foster care because we're going to keep kids safe. But 80% for neglect. So that one, all of a sudden, once you, boy, I'm like a dog on a bone.
Yeah,
What 80? Well, what's the neglect?
Neglect.
Right? We start pulling back the layers of the onion, and we find out that so you got a caseworker or CPI standing there. They're making an evaluation to remove a child in Florida. Now, let's call that what it is, by the way. That moment of choice will forever affect that family, and it will be the most traumatic moment of that child's life. So this is hanging in the balance. And we found out that the number one tangible need that they were being removed for was a lack of beds. Now here's where this really set my last 6 years off. Is like I've sat in churches my whole life that would be like, I want to help in foster care. I mean, my gosh, James 1:27 starts to lay out this path where foster care should matter. And yet we're finding that churches, and I get it. You're sitting in the average church, someone talks about that. A bunch of pastors, I believe, are nervous to talk about it because they're not doing anything in foster care or adoption, so they don't even want to bring it up. But if they bring it up, I think the natural reaction is, I need to foster, which is maybe the hardest thing on the planet to do. In fact, I'd say if you foster a child with special needs, it might be the hardest thing on the planet to do. But how many people in that church would be like, well, today, in the next 2 hours, before lunch, I could have a bed. I could donate it, I could buy it. Shoot, there's a lot of people I could build it. And that started changing our state. Because once we realized you have 20,000 faith institutions with, we think about 16 million people sitting in a faith service sometime during the week in our state, this giant phrase started opening up in our world that our state does not have a resource issue, we have a connectivity issue.
Exactly.
Wow.
And therein lies this idea that we're like, we've got to let people know. We got to let you guys know and me know, sitting in a church, our Jewish friends are right with us. So just let them know, hey, we need a bed. And a bed will stop the most traumatic moment of this kid's life. I mean,
how easy is that?
How basic.
Yeah, how are we not?
Yeah, right. Well, so that's what kind of
I got
made me
goosebumps
realize.
now, man. It's 6 years, I got goosebumps.
It's not that we don't have the resources. We know God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills.
Amen.
So we know that, but how do we connect? And I think, we can get into it, but what kind of blew me away was this kind of care portal. I think is that the name of it?
It is, yeah.
Okay. Just how in an instant, all those nonprofits, all those faith-based, communities can know of a need, and immediately I can say, I got that covered. Because I may hear something that there's a need, but go, man, my heart breaks for that, but I can't meet that need.
We talk about that in Lifework a lot. The first core value is clarifying your calling. And we think about calling a lot of times as your job or your career calling.
Right.
But there's also, we talk about a calling of what keeps you up at night. What's the thing that you can't unsee? As you were saying that, I've never had anybody ask it that way. But as soon as you said that, I knew the moment that I saw something that changed why I'm going to be running for school. Like, it was in that moment I was called to federal grand jury duty. I didn't even know what federal grand jury was. It was in Jacksonville. It was an 18-month commitment. I was selected to be on a federal grand jury.
I'm glad you took that.
Oh my goodness. The things that I heard in that, though,
Yeah.
it was the stuff that I walked away and thought, I've got to do a better job. There's things happening in the city on Emerson behind a BP station that I didn't know was going on. And so I think, but talking about what we talk about clarifying and calling, it's also clarifying what tugs on your heartstrings. Because you might talk about kids without a bed, and that instantly draws somebody to, oh my gosh, I got to get a bed. But it might be homelessness. Oh, I can't imagine that on our cold night there's somebody sleeping outside. And one, I might feel like, I feel bad about that, but that's not the thing that keeps me awake at night.
No.
But everybody kind of has that thing where like the Holy Spirit steps in and says, this is the thing that keeps you awake at night. How do we get them to get involved in that?
And the only wrong answer is to do nothing.
To do nothing, right? And that's yet what we do. We get paralyzed.
Yeah. Well, your heart's not going to break for everything.
Right.
No.
But I can't remember the book I read. It talked about the intersection of your passion connecting with your giftedness, connecting with opportunity. And we know there are tons of opportunities for the body of Christ or the faith-based community to rally and meet a need, but we want to make sure we connect. It's like whether it's, you've had those things where at church, you're committing yourself to all these various things, going, wait, am I robbing somebody else of something that they're uniquely passionate about and gifted to do? So I think that's where the care portal is so unique.
Yes.
Is here's the need.
So how does the care portal work? What is that? I'm not familiar.
Am I getting ahead of myself?
Not
on that?
at all. You just made me think of a Bob Tebow story. So I'm going to tell you Bob Tebow's story, and then I'll answer how Care Portal works.
Okay.
So one of my favorite parts of running the Tebow Foundation, in fact, I'm a huge Bob Tebow fan, and Bob would just come. It was Mr., by the way. Let me be clear. I only call him Bob
I know
now.
Bob well.
In the day, it was Mr. Tebow.
Podcast is Bob.
Yeah, that's right. Mr. Tebow. I'm sorry, Mr. Tebow. But he would come in my office and he would sit on the couch and we would just talk. Like it was like having a pastor just to show up for hours, and it was wonderful.
Yeah.
And one day we were talking about a project we were about to do in Haiti. And I'd been working on that project for at least a year and a half, where we were going to kind of acquire a place. And we're sitting at the table, and he's so casual. He'd be like, well, not always, by the way, but he was casual in this moment and said, so why are we doing it again? And again, it's a year and a half later, so I'm way down the road. In fact, I think it was that week or the next week I was going to sign the papers to do the acquisition with their board and our board. And I said, well, Mr. Tebow, I feel like we're supposed to do it. I mean, if you look at the children that are here and you look at the ministry that's happening and you look at where our passions are and kind of how we're serving, and I just believe we're called to do it. He said, well, time out. And anytime he did that, by the way, it was sermon time. And he said, is it supposed to do it or called to do it?
Yeah.
And he said, there's a big difference.
Oh, yeah.
Right? He said, if you're supposed to do it, then let me tell you a few things. You're going into one of the hardest countries that's ever been worked in the planet. You're going to have your teeth kicked in. You're going to have things stolen from you. You're going to have opposition from the enemy. You're going to have opposition from the people. You're going to face things, and we're going to be bloody. He said, and we should not do it. Now, if we're called to do it, all those things are true, but it's worth it, and we're going to do it.
Yeah.
And I think, I always think about, I'm raising 5 children, so I talk a lot about intentionality, because culture is made to have us flow a direction, and all of a sudden it will spit us out. Pastor Martin always talks about, when you go to the beach, and I think this is the best analogy I've heard of it. You go to the beach, you walk straight out from your towel, you wait an hour, and you look up, and your towel's 50 yards that way. Right. That's the flow. So.
Yeah.
Anyways, the called versus supposed to is a key piece, which I didn't want to just Care Portal.
Well, and it's recognizing what that call is, and that doesn't minimize.
100%.
I don't go to bed at night and think about the homeless, and not that I don't care for them, but that's not the thing that I'm called to step into.
Right. This is Confessions by Tammie.
Right.
Please go on. But honestly, if you were called to everything, you'd get nothing done.
You couldn't get anything done.
You'd be considered completely ineffective.
That's right.
Yeah.
I think Care Portal may be one of the coolest things that's happening. So let me just give it to you really simple. It's an app. That's it. It's a technology-based. I've got my phone.
I'm going to say, I'm going to download the app.
You should have it by the time we finish this. So it's an app. It started in Kansas City by a group called the Global Orphan Project. And they were asking these questions years ago. How can we increase connectivity between what I call, they don't call it quite this, but needs and need meters, which both exist all the time. So they build an app, and this is how it works. A caseworker or CPI, a state-level employee, walks into a home. Again, they're there oftentimes because they got a call, right? They show up and they're assessing a situation. And when they assess that situation, what I believe happens, and I've had this confirmed now by some caseworkers, they look and there's too few. It has to be a bed per child. So let's just use the bed one for a second. There has to be car seats, right? I mean, things that are essential for keeping a child safe and what we believe to be the standard of care for a child. We being the state of Florida. So they're in that moment. They see they don't have enough beds. What I believe has happened is they look and they go, "What? I'm not going to remove a kid for a bed." So they probably buy a bed, and they don't make enough. By the way, caseworkers and CPIs don't make enough, so they buy a bed. Well, the problem is week 2 when they're in the next home and the next child doesn't have a bed. I've always kind of envisioned they call Uncle so and so, and they're like, "Hey, Uncle so and so with money, would you buy a bed?" "Oh yeah, sure, I'll buy a bed." What this does is this allows a caseworker now, standing in front of the family with permission. Well, let's call it what it is, by the way. 90% will be single moms. I mean, so when I say family, that's not really the situation they're normally standing in. But they're going to pull up their thing, and with their permission, with no names, they're going to say, I have a family in so-and-so with it needs a bed, needs 2 car seats, need a changing table. Because there's never just one need. If they don't have a bed, probably may not have food. So we need groceries, we need whatever. The moment they hit submit, it goes to every faith and community organization in that city that has signed up to see need. Real time.
Right.
Wow.
Okay? So Florida, we come in as the 29th state. It's in 38 states now. We're leading in every category. In fact, Oklahoma had the lead for a long time, but we beat them. And if we're going to beat them, let's beat them for this. So what's happening in Florida is eyes are being opened in a new way. There's 1,000 churches signed up. 1,000 churches have signed up. Many individuals.
So
anybody,
it can be an individual
can
or
sign
a
up.
business.
A business. Lifework can sign up.
Okay.
We have the UCF football team. The head coach was like, I want to do it. He divided into the 10 position groups and gave each position group $10,000 to watch needs and have needs met. Because by the way, these kids on the football team, guess what environments they came from?
Right.
Many of them from a foster care environment.
Right.
Needed the bed.
Yeah.
And so we're watching the first 2 clubs to sign up were the 100 Black Men was the first club to sign up in Florida, and then a church, and then along the way we picked up a couple Harley clubs, and we got it.
I love it.
And so my point is everybody just being aware, because what I'm doing, and I'm not trying to be sneaky. I'm very, very out there about my intent. I want them to see things they have to wrestle with.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so what's happened in Florida is that app, it has, I'm just, the end statement that I can make, and then I'll come into it again. 5 years later, 6 years ago, August 1st, 2019, exact date with an exact number, we had 23,332, 23332 children in foster care. We were one of the 5 worst states, which were big, so that makes sense, but what a horrible thing to lead in.
Yeah.
So we got the most kids in foster care of most in the country, not most, but top 5. And today, we're under 16,000 children in foster care. Wow. 6 years. It's not even 6 years. Now, how did it happen? Well, you should ask the question, did it happen because of adoption or reunification? No, the numbers are almost stagnant. It literally was because we went upstream, which government doesn't do normally. We went upstream and we said, hey, we see some needs. We expose those needs to faith and community organizations. The church shows up to bring a bed and a car seat. Well, I can picture you two walk. So you show up, you bring the bed, right? And when you're there, you see other things, right? And so the moment that happens, we find that 80% of those mothers and families don't enter a second need. Well, it's not because they don't have them. It's because once you guys see them, you're a church family, not a state family. Yeah. And it has, when I tell you it has revolutionized, I mean, we're down 30-something% in foster care, which is why every other state's calling and asking how we did it. Well, we did it through, and we did it through Care Portal and something the First Lady calls Hope Florida. And I'll just say this briefly about what she did. Now, on that same app, a church gets needs from Department of Children and Families, which is, by the way, most people probably don't know, Department of Children and Families is both widow and orphan. They are both. They have domestic violence. They have the trafficking pieces are in DCF. But we also have needs being entered by the Department of Juvenile Justice, Department of Veteran Affairs, Department of Elder Affairs, the Agency for People with Disabilities, from my Tebow days of passion for me. So in your phone, in the next 2.5 minutes, or all of Lifework, by the way, it could see real-time needs in their community within
so
a certain area.
Demographic based? You can put your demographic.
You can put your exact targeted location. It goes out within a range, and it will tell you needs. So you talk about And by the way, let's call this what it is. Did you see the Sound of the new one, Sound of Hope?
Yes.
Sound of Hope.
Very good.
Do you remember how one church is doing all the work in foster care and adoption, and they go to that other church in a really kind of painful moment, and they're like, can you help us? Well, that's happening too. Because in some of our communities, our church has nothing but need. In other parts of our community, our church has resources galore. In this city, there are some churches with resources galore that would love to know that little bitty church over here in a community that they're never going to step foot in is needing that. So it's just, you can just picture,
Love it.
I think, I use the words, it's simple but profound. But the reason I say that is because it's just returning to what I think was God's plan anyways.
That's what I was just going to say. We were saying that prior. I mean, that's what the church was meant to be for. It wasn't meant to fall on the shoulders of government.
Well, I think it gets back to this idea that we just don't want to see that part. It's like those areas of town you don't go into. And I think that's where we as the church, we've got to go in all. I mean, Jesus said, "Go therefore and make disciples of all nations." Acts 1:8.
Yes.
You're going to be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the other parts of the world. Sometimes the worst parts of the world or in
on.
our own community.
Right.
Well, think about what we're doing for you. If you're going down that path, we're actually letting you go there by a state employee going there.
Yeah.
Which is maybe the smarter, safer part. I always get a kick out of right after a hurricane with the best intentions. All the churches grab chainsaws and pitchforks and head towards the disaster. And it's like, this is a much more organized version. And we have a response for emergency management now, where we can put needs directly from hurricanes right out, so that churches don't have to sit around and wonder, like, how do I do this?
Right.
And so 1,000 so far. There's 20,000. There's about 17,000 Christian churches in Florida, so we got a ways to go. But we're leading in every category. We had over 1,000 needs met in December alone through that program, and you can imagine what that's doing upstream.
Yeah.
But I think it releases three things immediately, and this is important. Michael Scott says a win-win-win. The win is that the state now has a group that's passionate about it, serving in the moment when they're vulnerable, and let's call it what it is. The church does it for free. Right. So instead of it being on the expense of the taxpayer, now it's the church's handling. So the state wins. The family most certainly wins because that child avoids the most traumatic moment of life and gets wraparound care. But the part that doesn't get talked about as much in the church, but in doing what it was called to do, gets set on fire in a different way. It's just how it is. I mean, I have a bunch of church back when I was pitching people to do Night to Shine when we started that thing. I'm going around, I'm knocking on church doors. I'm like, I think you should do this prompt for people with special needs. And what we learned over those years was the ones that, yes, it took a lot out of you. Yes, there was sacrifice, but the fire that came out of that for those churches, and it's the same thing's happening again now.
Yeah. Well, I think so often we enter things not counting the cost.
Yeah.
I think what we're saying here, there is a cost to meeting the needs of our state, our community. But there are people who have the resources, have the passion, have the giftedness to go do that.
But isn't there a cost to our faith? I mean, the
Should
Bible
be.
says you take up the cross every day.
Right.
And I think that's where I go back to a lot of the selfishness is we're so engrossed in our own life. I mean, and I am guilty of it. That's why I keep saying it, because I know that's where I land. I'm worried about my kids.
I'm with you.
Where they're going to go to school.
Well.
I worry so much about my own personal stuff that the person in need down the road gets the last of me instead of the first.
I don't know, you're running for school.
Well.
But think about if you opened.
I think that's from the idea. I got to do something,
If you opened your phone and there was a need from a veteran, a need from and also, look, there's so many things that I think are amazing. But the church, we've been in a very political, anti-abortion environment. And again, I won't spend a lot of time on this, although I'm really happy that Florida has been a life state. So one of the criticisms of the church is you're only for pro-birth. You're not for the rest of life. Not anymore.
Not anymore.
Like this is from DCF. So the youngest you can get to elder affairs, which is the oldest you can get, and every need in between.
Yeah.
And so I think there's this, like, for people who have sat around and wondered, well, how do I know? Or maybe I don't want to know, which then again, we'll bring them on a little collision course.
Right.
Can we talk about America's favorite subject about the separation of church and state?
Yes.
Can I know you're on the two side, I'm on the one side, but so there's no question I've ever been asked more than that in these past 6 years. Okay, so I just in fairness, most people that ask it, they're not looking to have a conversation. They're looking to make a statement and walk away. But certainly the very existence of my role perturbs people. So aside from the fact that we're going to save the state about $1 billion in tax savings just from the work that's being done, there's a bigger picture here, right? Which is the separation of church and state. I'm speaking to the choir, but because other people are going to hear and see this, is one of the most misdefined, most damaging things that's ever happened to the church. Because Thomas Jefferson, because some listeners still won't, it's a letter, we all know, right? It's a letter to Baptists, giving the greatest protections, by the way, that we will not have a national church and we should stay out of the business of the church. Yes and amen. All churches should say yes. But the fact that caused in society this siloing of we're going to go, because I think most people miss, and I don't know if you even thought about this, when we wake up, if you're in government, if you're in good government and you're in the church, you wake up caring for the same people.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know how many times people think about that. Like, again, I think government's over there. But we're caring for the same people that the church wants to care for, and actually, we have better information on them than the church does. And so what happened with that split of this tremendously misdefined phrase in a letter is that the church abdicated that role in history, and you know that when the role was abdicated of caring for, that's not something God's going to let go of.
Right.
So he keeps having preachers preach. They're like, well, wait a minute, we abdicated the role, but my heart still breaks for it. My eyes are still open to it. And so they are like, okay, we're going to get back into it. But we don't want to talk to the government because they're bad. And so there's no trust there. And so we're going to do it ourselves. And I always joke, like, I mean, we've got some pretty good-sized churches in Jacksonville they would say, I'm going to start a foster care ministry. Okay. How are you going to do that? Well, Susie over there and Tammie over there and that guy over there, and they kind of know foster care, and we're going to talk to them, and then maybe they're going to go into some area that they think they're just going to go and try to help people. And I'm like, guys, do you realize that right now the Department of Children and Family knows every name, address, and story of every child? And now we can't give you that, but we can literally through Care Portal put them where you are coming eye to eye with the people. And I think it's blowing. I talk to, I don't want to exaggerate it, but it's often every couple weeks right now I'm talking to another state about what's happening here, and it's because they're going. Well, first they see a reduction in foster care of that size, they want to know about it, but two, they're starting to ask that question too. Well, why aren't we talking? And what? And so we. I think you know this, but the very first thing we ever did as the Governor's Faith and Community Initiative was send a thank you note to 40,000 faith and community organizations, and just said, we don't even know how to thank you, but we recognize that you're standing on the front line and you're saving the taxpayer dollars. And because I know no one ever wants to make it money, but my gosh, every blue and red state in America should be thanking them just for that.
Yeah.
Because if they ever went away, day one, we implode in government. And so I just think I've really come down to that's government's role is to allow the information to be upstream shared, so that the faith institutions can do what they do and the whole ecosystem changes.
Yeah.
Do you think the government sees the value of that? Are they missing it as well, or is it just the church that's missing it? Like, does the government appreciate, I know you sent out, your office in Florida is doing that, but overarching, do you see is the government missing it, or is the government really like, hey, we see the value of you, we want to get engaged, and the church is just the one that's missing it?
No, they both are missing it.
They're both missing it.
Yeah, they're both missing it. I mean, and this is not a defense of government, but because I've explained church and state for 6 years, it would be fun to know hundreds of times, I don't know how many times. It's always helpful for me to kind of give two pictures to people. One, if you think about government, and this will change everything for you, you got to know that most of government exists from the moment crisis ends to the moment crisis begins. From the moment crisis begins to the moment crisis ends. Right. Okay. Meaning that government has a very specific lane. If you just start thinking of where government exists, right? We come into an emergency with a crisis and we let go at the moment. Okay. So where does faith and community exist? Well, they are prevention, they are love and compassion during, and they are reunification and community. Meaning that what government has gotten wrong, and you will look at me, probably turn the mics on, but Erik, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. But the truth is, government spends all their time bailing a boat and never asking, where's the water coming from? Or do we need a new boat, which I would put on both ends of this. And so what's changed the game is that faith is limited by nothing. Faith and community can be part of any part of it. Government's the one that's limited. So we're going to have our little lane, and our lane is keep people safe, help them in their most desperate moments. And so, no, we have totally missed it because we didn't. And when I got there, I kind of joked. I was like, it's almost like being bilingual. There's a different as an example, we use James 1:27 in this time together. You don't use the word orphan in state government. Yeah. That's a no word, right? There's foster care, there's adoption, but there's no such thing as orphan. So even at our core of the thing that is called pure religion, the words are different. And that's a silly example, but it speaks to how there is a different language. And so government's saying, and this was the case, I'd go into an agency and I'd be like, what can faith, because all of a sudden I represent all these faith, what can I do? What can we do to help you? And they don't know. Yeah. I don't know. What do you do? Like, well, everything. I mean, again, we're in every part of this thing. And so we've spent 6 years teaching government even to know what to ask for. Right. Or to start to look upstream or say to them, because I think this was the other model. There's 3 things I believe government does. I don't know if they do it well, but they do it. I was going to say well, but I was like, I should hold that. Money, right? We have a $113 billion budget. So we have a lot of money that we give away for organizations to do or employees to do. And 2, policy, right? We write policy that's for the greater good of Floridians. But the one that's never talked about, and this is just, I made this up, so is information. I mean, you know how much information we have on a daily basis? Yeah. And yet we're like, keep it. And Care Portal and Hope Florida are just starting to crack the door where DCF doesn't have to change its lane. Right. It just has to let some legal, information with permission. I mean, all those things matter. Let it upstream. I mean, do you see it? Do you see why I keep using that phrase, simple but profound? This is not complicated.
Well, and I think the easy access to it, having an app, literally as I was in the car coming in here, I was on a Zoom meeting, and it was literally a gentleman from the Carolinas speaking to innovation and faith. And he was saying how, for whatever reason, faith institutions, nonprofits, churches, or whatever, are delayed in innovation. It's like we're the last sometimes to jump into modern, and myself included. Like, you throw something out, I'm like, oh, that's a little throw the word AI out, and I'm like, I don't know, that's a world I'm, and so we see that in churches. And so he was talking about, he kept going back to the verse that says, when it says, I'm now doing a new thing. And we say that verse all the time, but he was saying maybe the new thing is, technological, digital innovation that we're not used to. And it sounds like that care portal sometimes will alleviate that. It's just access in your hand.
We were talking about the cost of, counting the cost. Yeah. Okay, there's a need, there's a cost to it. Mm-hmm. But what is the cost of inactivity? There's a cost of activity, there's a cost of inactivity. And I'm sure you can speak to that a little bit.
Well, I mean, I probably should have put a number on this on the front side. When you reduce your foster care system by 7,000, I'm going to speak real cost for a second, by 7,000 children, that's savings to the state of somewhere between low end, really low conservative end, 54 million, up to a couple $100 million, depending on which way the child would have went in care. So there's a legit savings that the taxpayer receives. Now, I would say the real cost that happens when we do nothing is the most vulnerable suffer. Yeah. And I think that's the greatest, that's the calamity of why I said it's the worst thing that ever happened to the church, was this misdefinition. Because the only people that lose when both sides throw their stake in the ground, they silo up, and they're like, you're government, we're state, we're not going to, and again, not to continually quote Pastor Joby, but he's been talking about this a lot lately. We're not asking faith to step outside their lane. He gave us this perfect picture. He's like, I know my lane. I got my little 18-wheeler going down the lane of faith, and I'm going to just keep in that lane. Now, if government brings some of their stuff into my lane, I've got to deal with it. And which has happened in recent months. And so I think we're asking faith institutions to say, guys, I don't, how would I say this? We've been in such a political divisive time, right? That I think it is fair to look across every aisle, and I don't mean aisle just politically, every aisle that separates every one of us, and say, do you realize that when we bicker or we do nothing, the only people that lose are the most vulnerable? Right. We lose like treasures in heaven, and we serving God. I mean, that's a loss too. But I think it's crazy that we're bickering in silos while the most vulnerable become more vulnerable. Right. As an example, I mean, this one may, we defeated Amendment 4 here in Florida. The result of defeating Amendment 4, regardless, by the way, and I'm going to be very, very clear on this, regardless of whether people were for it or against it, this is the truth right now. 40,000 new babies will be born per year in the state of Florida from that being defeated. Right. Now, some people, when you're listening to this, are cheering. There's other people like, that amendment annoyed the heck out of me. I don't really care what side they're on. They better start caring for babies. Yeah. Because either way,
there's going to be 40,000.
Either way, there's 40,000 new babies, and the great truth is those babies are going to be from some vulnerable mamas, and they're going to be children with special needs. Will be the two dominant groups. And so where I get frustrated, and where I kind of believe God's caused me to take my entire career and platform or influence, is to say to them, nothing is not an answer. Like, if you were for or against that, now it doesn't matter. Right. Now what matters is, are you going to stand for moms and babies? Because if you're not, then honestly, don't vote next time, because your vote is not, it doesn't matter. Like, you just put your money where your mouth is on that. And so we, as a state, have been using this phrase to be pro-life at all stages of life. And so I think the loss there is that we are doing things, and then we redivide again. And again, once again, the loser isn't us, it's the most vulnerable people.
We pick a word of the year as a family. We do our goals at the end of the year, and everybody has to pick a word of the year. We get the little bracelet, all the stuff. And my word this year is civility. And I think it's why I had this verse.
You have the bracelet on?
I do.
Okay, that's just a check. I want to make sure.
I do.
In case the kids
I better take some notes here.
Yeah.
I do, but it was this
we'll
verse
turn this
that
into
we
a parenting podcast. Teach us.
Talked about, Jeremiah 9, and talking about just the division and the divisiveness. This verse just screamed at us this year. This is what the Lord says. Let not the wise man boast of his wisdom, the strong man boast of his strength, the rich man boast of his riches, but let him who boasts boast about this, that he understands and knows me, God, that I am the Lord who exercises kindness, justice, and righteousness on earth. And when you think about what we're talking about, it's the kindness and the justice. It's that piece of where they merge, and that's where the faith side can come in and say, listen, this is where we can step in and help with this. This is where the kindness can come in, and the justice for these people. I think it's that divisiveness that turns people away from doing the good.
100%.
Doing the good.
Yeah. I was thinking about, we've probably all had stitches in life, right?
I have not.
You've never had stitches?
Stitches.
Broken arm?
No.
No?
I'm a very cautious
Wow.
person.
I have had some stitches. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, you couldn't write this nice if you had stitches at the same time. You'd be all messed up.
Well, with a number of grandkids and 5 kids myself,
stitches
a
with
lot of
that, yeah.
stitches, a lot of broken arms.
You've probably given stitches to that many grandkids. Just sewing them in there.
When you think about somebody who severs their skin where they need stitches,
Yeah.
okay, there's a wound. Something has to happen to heal that wound.
That's right.
You got to get 2 sides together.
Yes.
That's
And
a
then
great
weave it
analogy.
together. And I think the Spirit of God is, as believers in the Lord Jesus Christ, we believe that's the thread that runs through that. It's not political. It's biblical.
It's biblical.
The division you talked about. There is a cost to meeting the needs that we have in our community, but there's a cost if we don't meet that need. Is we still got a wound.
That's correct.
We got an open wound that's going to cause some severe problems. And so, our vision, and I know yours is too, because it's to lock arms with you guys and to figure out how do we as a faith community heal those wounds that are there. Because we can't unsee what we've seen. There's a wound, and there are wounds, multiple wounds throughout our communities. How do we as the faith community weave together by the power of the Spirit to heal that? And I think that is what we're commanded to do.
My son wears a shirt. I don't remember where he got it, but it could have been either Busy Bee or Buc-ee's, because those are 2 places that's
shop.
That's where we shop.
on a regular basis.
Exactly.
But I loved it. We walked in and it said, "You can't simultaneously wash feet and throw stones."
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And I think, like, as I think of your stitches that you refer to, that's we can't if we can drive the flow towards serving people. The divisiveness, it's not that it goes away; it just becomes less relevant,
overshadowed.
right? And I think, I think that's a really interesting point, because let me say to people listening, what they might not know, and they need to process this, is that, because I realize the way the political environment's gotten is wild, by the way, but Florida's just over 50% Republican and 40-something% Democrat, but faith. Right, we know that 70% of our state says they're Christian. 3% say they're Jewish, and 3% say all other faith, which is interesting in itself. And certainly, and while it also is interesting that 24% say no faith. I know we probably could spend the rest of the time on that.
Next podcast.
But the 70% that are faith, and again, I'm gonna step in it a little bit here to say that means this isn't a party line issue.
Right.
That's right.
Right.
Like, and I don't know if people need to hear that.
Yeah.
Like this, and I'm not willing to say, for the people that might feel this way, well, that means that all Republicans are of faith and 20% of Democrats.
Right.
Get out.
Right.
That's just
Right.
ridiculous. And so
Right.
we know that we're
Right.
split. This party line thing,
Right.
I just think, Brad, I would say this. I feel like we've got to figure out a way, right, to be talking about the fact that we unite on God and His Son to the 70% level, right? A savior, we unite on a Savior, then that should be talked about, and politics should not be talked about. Because again, and that was one of the times with Timmy, he would always say, all Christians that talk long enough, and we anthem this around about Night to Shine, if we talk long enough, we're going to find issues to disagree on. So we've got to keep, I would say to all people listening, if you keep your eyes on the fact that you love God, and love the Lord, and vulnerable people, the stitches happen.
Yeah.
Right.
Because again, you'll start to find out that, like another pastor in town here, that Jason Cullum at Christ Church, buddy of mine, he's always said, for as long as I've known him, he said most of us are like the rest of us.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we don't know that till we get in the trench of
the
serving people.
trenches.
And guess what you don't talk about when you show up to serve people?
Politics.
Yeah.
What?
So,
Yeah. I mean, you don't
who
want
votes
nobody's
for?
got a
Yeah.
donkey or elephant on the
Right.
shirt that day.
Right.
Well, someone might, but they'd be.
Yeah.
We could
Yeah.
let them go. So I think the healing is that there's more we unify on than we disagree on.
Totally. If we love the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, Deuteronomy
70%.
says. And then Jesus added to it, love your neighbor as yourself. We better love vertically. If we love vertically, we will love horizontally.
That's correct.
Right?
That's correct.
So, Eric, as we kind of bring this to a close, you've got an audience out there listening who are probably like Brad and I saying, okay, I want in. How can I help? What can I do? What would be the 3 biggest things you could tell us? This is what you can do to be involved, to take action that would help.
Well, the biggest thing is, please do not end the podcast and do nothing.
Yeah.
Okay, so like let's start with what you can't do. You can't be like on to the next thing, which, by the way, is the current of the world, right? So I just would say my plea would be challenge yourself with something.
Yeah.
Right. Have your eyes open. Again, but see something. But if the practical probably question that's really to be answered is, there's nobody in Florida that should not go and download Care Portal.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, because I'm not even saying you have to meet needs. I'm saying just see them.
Just know what's
You just
out.
want to see what's happening. You could pick any. And by the way, if you're a Floridian but you're from, which is a lot of us, not me, I'm a native, but there's a lot of them from other states, go pick that city because it's in 38 states. So you can see needs in any city you want that has covered by Care Portal. And so do that. You can just go to careportal.com and then Hope Florida. If there are faith leaders listening, I would say you should join us in part of the Governor's Faith and Community Initiative. We've created a voice. I mean, I have a seat at the leadership table of Governor DeSantis with 12 people that run the state that he said faith matters. So you should join us just simply to hear what's happening and to be able to have your voice heard. And so those pieces matter. And then again with the Hope Florida piece, we never got there, but I'll say it simply. Florida has created a one-stop shop telephone number for all people in all need. 833 Get Hope. 833 Get Hope. That's for anybody to call. And I'll just share this as the last piece. When they call that number, a Hope Navigator, 190 of them around the state, pull up a computer screen, and on that screen they have churches and who they serve in that need that they're calling about. They have nonprofits and which ones serve that need, and then they have the state budget and programs, and they navigate a person through that process from one telephone number.
Wow.
Again, it's not, I do like bragging about Florida, so that's not, I do like doing that, but that's not my motive. My motive is, that's why we talk to so many other states. My motive is, this is not crazy stuff. It unleashes what the church was meant to do. It gets government out of the way.
Amen.
We overcome Ronald Reagan's quote that I also hear all the time. I'm here from government and here to help kind of stuff. And we're building trust, but we're not building trust so that we can trust each other. That doesn't matter. We're building trust so that we can serve the most vulnerable.
Yeah, we're meeting needs.
Yeah.
Yeah, human needs.
Human needs at the core level, which, again, it doesn't matter where you sit on the fence. There are a lot of needs right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, you're doing great work. And no doubt there is going to come a day when you will see him before the Lord and he will say, well done.
Yeah.
So thank you
Amen.
for what you're
Amen.
doing.
Yeah.
I can I tell you about that? So I think about that moment.
Yeah,
You know what I think about most? I want to run across the finish line.
Yeah.
that's right.
And I just say partially because I've lived in Palm Beach and I've lived in Sanibel. Those two parts of my life.
Old people there.
Maybe we'll just say
They're not running anymore.
I'm a teenager in Sanibel, and I look at the ones that are,
Yeah.
and I'm always like,
Yeah.
praise God.
Yeah.
Like to every person listening, there's nobody that gets to be, well, I'm to this or I'm to that or I'm to this, I'm to that. No. Until the day that you cross that line, man, put the shoes back on and let's do it.
Yeah.
Again, somebody's sitting at home right now. It's like, and the last thing, I'm 75 years old, I'm 80 years old. I'm not in the foster, no kidding, buy a bed.
Yeah. Well, I think about the scripture that speaks about that we were prepared for good works
Right.
beforehand.
In advance.
Those who are listening right now have been prepared for these works. And I'm excited to see the needs. Let's meet the needs together.
This is great. Thank you.
Well, God bless you guys.
Good to see you,
so
man.
appreciate being with you.
Yeah, loved it.
Keep moving and leaving.